James Arnold Taylor, the voice of Obi-Wan Kenobi. Welcome to a more civilized podcast. This is the podcast you're looking for. You may not go about your business. Stay here, listen, and then move along.
Welcome. Hopefully you've been listening for a little bit already to a more civilized podcast. This is our 10th full episode. Nothing new under the sun. I'm Kyler.
I'm Chris.
And I'm Ross.
Oh, we are so happy to be here today. Ross, you got some news for us?
Yes. Well, and it's kind of a follow-up to news that we had several weeks ago. Squashing rumors about, I forget his name, Rian Johnson being fired and Kathleen Kennedy maybe being let go, and how those are all rumors. Today we have official confirmation of Kathleen Kennedy renewing her contract to be the president of Lucasfilm. Another 3 years.
Yeah, I was going to say 3 years.
So I didn't realize that's the way they were working it before, that she had a certain limit and maybe they would choose someone else. But she's still it for another 3 years, so that's a good vote of confidence from Disney. I have no problem with what she's been doing. I know you do see a lot online, but of course it's the internet, so of course they're going to complain. So, congratulations, Kathleen. Keep doing what you're doing.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, boy. So, I think that's all kind of a short news week here. We are ready to get into this episode. This episode we are going to be discussing the film, literature, other
historical events.
Historical, all of the influences, or not all the influences, some of the influences that inspired George Lucas to create Star Wars and how he went about creating Star Wars. And we have just oodles of notes. I've got 4 pages here, which you can hear.
Yeah, Kyler has oodles of notes. Yeah. I have 2 little bullet points.
So, I have memory.
I'm
not much of a note taker.
It's we've got a lot to talk about. It's going to be pretty fun, I think. So I think we're going to. I'll do a couple, I think, and then we'll. Yeah.
I did want to talk about real quick. Stealing like an artist.
Yeah.
So this is a phrase. This is a phrase that comes up a lot when I hear authors and other media creators talking. It's a very familiar term to a lot of people, and it's not always as familiar, I think, outside of the circles of people who are making media. Is this concept that the reason Kyler named this nothing new under the sun is everything's been done before to some degree or another. Nothing is wholly original, and that's not a bad thing. That's just a thing. Like, you can always draw parallels, you can find similarities, even if you're not consciously lifting stuff from other places. You're going to be influenced by other things. People are going to be able to find connections and influences. I've often heard it said, I forget who the original quote was, but it's just all modern English literature is responding to Shakespeare. Like, Shakespeare was the last genuinely creative person, and everyone since then has been responding to him or responding to someone who was responding to him, and so on ad infinitum. And I've heard similar things in fantasy and sci-fi, that it's just everyone in fantasy is responding to Tolkien or Robert E. Howard that did Conan the Barbarian. Like, that's just they're the big grandfathers, and so you get these cascading series of influences where people see something, they go, wow, I really like that, I want to do something like that, or I wish they'd done more of this, I'm going to pick up and do something different like that. And you get some massively wonderfully inventive things. Like, Star Wars was hailed as being amazingly unique and new and fresh, even though it is blatantly heavily influenced by all these things that came before it. George was unashamedly wholesale lifting things from other places because he loved them and wanted to do something similar. But he had the fortune of combining them in a way, the fortune and skill of combining them in a way that made something that felt very new, even though so much of it was familiar.
I think a good example of that in fantasy, the fantasy genre, is Robert Jordan. His Wheel of Time series, okay? Obviously inspired by Tolkien, I think it's safe to say.
Responding to Tolkien in a lot of ways,
very much inspired, and yet he is able to create something that feels new, even though it's very clearly inspired by Tolkien. And it's still, I love that series. It's a great series. It's well written. It's well done. Even though it's obviously inspired by Tolkien, and there's a lot of stuff where I'm going, oh, having read Tolkien, I can see where he pulls this idea, but I like the direction you took with this, and just because he is taking stuff from Tolkien, he is inspired by somebody else, Doesn't necessarily mean that that's bad.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that it's of poor quality or can't be enjoyed.
Or that it's derivative. Like,
Right.
there's a difference between something being derivative and something deriving things from other places. Like, derivative is usually used derogatorily, and it generally to mean, like, you're not being inventive, you're not doing anything new, and that's fair. That happens, we pick stuff up where it's just like, well, I've seen, that's... Aragon is one of my favorite examples of that, where for a lot of it's in teen literature for a good reason, because a lot of people who are younger readers who haven't read as widely in the fantasy genre will pick up Aragon and go, wow, I like this is new. For me, it's like, well, this is cobbled together out of every fantasy book I've ever read. I like it. His influences are baldly visible.
Yes.
And and he was young. He was published too young in many ways, but that happens often, right? That's my same problem. I have the same problem with James Cameron's Avatar. Where it's, a lot of people, it's just like, oh, this is so amazing, and I'm watching
Dances
that going,
with Wolves in Space.
well, even more than that, it's just even visually everything in that. I'm like, this is cobbled together out of everything sci-fi I've ever watched or read. Like, this is massive amounts. It's like things like, from the design of all the mechs is straight out of the Matrix, and the design of a lot of the creatures you could transplant them into Star Wars without it really standing out.
Yeah. That's true.
Or it's like the concept of a neural network between all the living things on the planet, and using that neural network to transfer consciousness from one body to the other to save a life. Oh, hey, that's lifted straight out of the Ender Quartet by Orson Scott Card. Like, that's not original. And then that's a very specific thing that it's like, yeah, that's hard to sell the idea that he didn't read those books.
A quartet, that's what you call 4 books? I always called it a quadrilogy.
I like that too. I've actually heard that. I've actually seen that more often lately, because more and more people are going, why not 4? Instead of making a proper trilogy, which is okay, but depending on how you do it.
Yeah.
Anyway, but what I wanted to drive at here is that there's a difference between being derivative and deriving things from other places and finding new uses for them, or appropriate tributes, all of that sort of thing. That's just how art is made. You can find chains of inspiration. Firefly, by most accounts that I've seen, is basically just Joss Whedon saying, I love Han Solo and I wish he was the main character of that story, so I'm going to write a science fiction story where Han Solo is the main character.
Yeah.
And obviously Mal has branched off from Han Solo enough that we don't feel it's derivative.
Right.
But you can clearly see the inspiration.
But yeah, you can definitely see when you
Even
say
in
that,
the
it's like, well, yeah, of
clothing
course. The clothing, the behavior, the fact that he's a smuggler, the fact, like, so much of what he does. Yeah. That he's ex-military, that has been disillusioned, and all this sort of stuff. He's
really loves his ship.
Yeah, he really loves his ship. And it's an awesome ship. Or even down to having a first mate that goes everywhere with him. Zoe is his Chewbacca.
Less hairy, though.
And less hairy, much more attractive, much more of a character in general. But yeah, it's not a bad thing to do this. It's actually one of the best ways to make something new is to go, I want more of that. Let me do that. It's one of the reasons a lot of people write a lot of fan fiction, and technically there's nothing wrong with that, but every time I'm not a fan fiction fan, but every time I see someone doing that is just like, oh yeah, I like to write fan fiction, I'm always like, but if you just branched it slightly further away, changed all the names of the characters, you could have something you could legally publish. Why not? Like, why not make it more your own instead of just trying to ape what they were already doing and falling short, because you're always going to.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people, it's because they want more of that thing. They don't want to create something original.
That is how this podcast got going. I heard, I'm a big fan of the podcast Bacon Sale, so everybody should go listen to them. They're fantastic. But they did a couple of Star Wars episodes, and I always felt myself, screaming at my iPod going, no, you're wrong! Or, yes, you were right! And so, but then also I was going, man, I wish they would do more Star Wars episodes. And then I was like, well, I have 2 friends who know Star Wars fairly well. Mm-hmm. Shoot, let's just do it ourselves then, and here we are.
But yeah, so it's a great way to make new things, and when it's done well. You can point at things.
Remains to be seen if this podcast is done well.
Yeah, we'll see. It's adequate.
We're adequate.
But But yeah, so there are a lot of people that get very dismissive and are just like, oh, this isn't original. It's like, no, even Shakespeare was just lifting stuff straight from older stories, and the Tristan and Isolde that wasn't even original when it was written.
Yeah.
And that's fine. If you can take something familiar and do it well, then it'll have all the more power because of the familiarity. That's part of what makes Star Wars work so well, is that archetypal, deep, primal connection that people can form with it, and that's beautiful. That's wonderful. So.
Yeah, and that's thank you, Chris, by the way, for giving us that sort of narrative insight, because that's going to play into pretty much everything that we say in this entire episode. So thank you for that preface. Because I'm only adequate, my notes are backwards, so we're going to have to work up.
Well, I can take
I'm fine.
I was going to do a couple, and then we'll let you do a couple. Okay. That way it's not me talking for an hour. As much as I would love that.
Yeah. I've got plenty to chime in on all the things you've listed.
So, just a couple of small bullet points before we get into the more like deeper analytical stuff, right? There was a movie, I believe a silent film, called The Fighting Devil Dogs from 1938, wherein there is a black-clad, black-caped, black-helmeted villain named the Lightning.
Yep.
And his army of white armored soldiers who fly through space in a triangular ship. Boy, I wonder what that might have turned into.
Yeah. He is generally credited as being a heavy direct influence.
If you look at pictures, I actually Googled the Fighting Devil Dogs and stuff, and you look at the lightning and it's like, oh, that's Darth Vader's prototype. Like, 100% Darth Vader. Easily seeing the comparisons there. Yeah, both Chris and Ross are looking it up on their phones.
I looked that up earlier. Yeah.
There's another film from 1955 called The Dam Busters. This is a British-made film. Set in World War II. These pilots have to fly along this careful mission, right, to destroy this dam and disrupt, enemy, whatever. But there's this scene in the film where they are flying through essentially a trench, dodging enemy fire, where they have to drop a bomb precisely on this exact spot, or else the whole thing isn't going to work. They have to time it precisely. I mean, that's obviously right out of, or I guess A New Hope is right.
No,
out
it's
of
not
this,
even.
right?
It's not even a. That's not even a subtle influence. That's what we discussed in an earlier one. How when Lucas did his rough edit so that he could show the producers and some other directors what he was making, he had World War II style dogfights that he cut into that footage as placeholders for the TIE fighter and X-Wing fights. And no, he lifted footage straight from that particular movie to place into there. And he even lifted sections of dialogue that are word for word. They're just straight out of there.
Yeah. I remember after as a teenager when I bought the special edition, when it came out on DVD and I was watching the special features, Lucas talked about how he really enjoyed these World War II movies and just footage in general of World War II and the dogfights, how he thought it looked really cool. And they placed side by side 3 German Stuka dive bombers that are flying level, and then they bank to the right and then go into their roll and dive, and showed 3 TIE fighters side by side with this footage, and it's exactly like the same angle and everything.
It's Vader and his 2 escorts.
It's so perfectly synced up. So I mean, there's no surprise here that he's just like, hey, that's a really cool shot from this World War II movie. Let's do it again.
And some of the dialogue that he the get set for your attack run. Look at the size of that thing. Those are straight out of.
Oh really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, those are lifted straight from the Dam Busters.
Wow.
Was that the same one that also had the number of guns that we were talking about earlier before?
No, Ross and I were talking earlier. There was, I forget what the name of it was, but there was another film that was also cited as an influence where it was fighters having to fly down a fjord in order to attack a target. So it was a similar trench style thing, and they had anti-aircraft emplacements on either side of the fjord shooting at them in the middle, and was definitely very clear influence.
Yeah, I mean, the line is almost the same of how many cannons do you think so and so? I think say about 20 guns.
Oh, geez,
that's almost right out.
Wow,
out of that movie.
I think that's exactly what he says. Actually, they ask him Gold Leader how many turrets are, and he says, I don't know, say about 20.
I was quoting Star Wars. I don't remember what it was.
Oh, sure.
So.
But either way, clear influence there. There's another one. This is a shout out to Chris, who lived in Russia for a little while. The Battleship Potemkin.
Oh, yeah.
1925 silent film, Russian. Sergei Eisenstein is the director there. A famous scene in there with a stroller coming down the the steps, and then like people marching up the steps and stuff like that. It's just kind of known as the stair scene or the Potemkin stairs. That could have been, although it's not confirmed, Lucas hasn't said this, but there's pretty good similarities between that scene and Anakin marching up the steps
that's the one
to the Jedi
in
Temple.
Episode 3, yeah.
Yeah. So, but again, you can't even say Lucas is a cheap knockoff of that, because that scene has been copied by
So many
pretty much
times,
everybody after that scene was filmed in Potemkin. Everybody saw it and was like, wow, that's crazy inspirational. Let's do it.
I would also add here too that there's two levels of influence, where it's like there are things that, well, I'd even say there's three. There's things that George Lucas has flat out said, "Yep, I stole from that. I lifted from that. That was an influence. I love that. That was part of what I was using to build Star Wars." And then there are things that are like shot for shot similar, where it's like he hasn't necessarily said, "Yeah, I did that," but it'd be hard to argue otherwise, because it was they were very well known films. Everybody knew about them. Especially major filmmakers were influenced by them, so it's not hard to make a connection. And then there's stuff that people have put out there and said, well, but this could also be an influence, and you'd be harder set to prove it, but it's possible.
Yeah.
So, kind of 3 levels of canon there.
Ooh, there we go. Good callback.
Thanks.
Another movie by the impeccable Frank Capra, Lost Horizon, 1937. I didn't actually know about this one until I started doing some research. But apparently in Lost Horizon, there's a character called the High Lama, who's kind of this wise old sensei, kind of that archetypal, wisdom giver, who was also really short and diminutive. He had a weird way of speaking, and who has a death scene almost shot for shot identical to Yoda's death scene in Return of the Jedi. And Yoda is also diminutive. And
that's
has a weird
one
way
of those
speaking.
where I believe from what I read, Lucas has never said, "Yep, I lifted that" or anything.
But when you look at it,
it's strong enough that
it's hard to make the argument otherwise. Yeah, exactly. Okay, we're almost done with these shorter ones. Yeah, if those are the shorter ones, guys, get ready. Ben-Hur, of course, the chariot racing scene and the pod racing scene. I haven't made that connection.
Yeah, right down to the pod races getting stuck on each other at the end of the race. That happens in Ben-Hur, where they lock wheels, and it's almost shot for shot.
Yes, and that was the thing. Like when I read that, I was like, oh my gosh, that's true. And I started kind of running through the pod race in my head. And I was like, oh my goodness, that is, like, there are a ton of elements like that. Like them getting locked together.
To that.
The elements, Sebulba sabotaging the other people. You see charioteers trying to sabotage in various ways. You have chariots crashing, wheels falling off, and the different pod racers have engines going different ways. I was like, wow, that's really crazy. And also, this one actually just came to me, but of course there's famously the guy died in the chariot scene in Ben-Hur. Gets run over, gets trampled. I can't remember the character's name, but he's the one whose engine won't start or whatever, and he's stuck there, and he essentially gets passed by or run over by the other pod racers.
I believe he tries to start it and ends up
but there's one where somebody gets passed over basically. And I'm like, oh, that's essentially the getting run over by the chariots. Anyway.
Oh, in fact, that guy, no, he's still sitting in his pod.
Yeah, and then it explodes.
It has the 4 engines and they go flying in different directions, and he's fine.
But that's what I'm saying is he gets
passed
over by everybody, but they're all up above him because they're repulsor craft, so it's like he's getting run over. I'm just like, wow, there's a lot of similarities when you stop to think about it. And then this one shouldn't be a surprise. I guess I didn't technically know it, so I guess I was technically surprised. But George Lucas was a big fan of Star Trek.
Yep.
Which is from the 1960s. Big fan of the original Star Trek series there. And so just the general love of sci-fi that inspires, I mean, that should be a no-brainer. He apparently would go to Star Trek conventions and stuff.
Oh, really?
As a fan, yeah.
Yeah.
So, that's understandable. Star Trek is great. We've got an episode talking about that coming up, which I'm excited for.
Well, more specifically talking about Star Wars and Star Trek.
Yes.
We're not just going to talk about Star Trek on our Star Wars show.
Ross, you want to do a couple?
I really just had a one coincidence that isn't as much of a coincidence as people think it is. Well, or might be. So the name Vader has kind of been not really a hot topic, but everyone's always like, oh, it's the Dutch version of father, so of course he named him Vader. Well,
That would require Lucas to have a working knowledge of Dutch.
right.
Yeah.
And
it's helped by the fact that Lucas flat out said at multiple points, "Oh yeah, I took this from there." But if you look at the history,
Doesn't line up. Yeah.
well, the video that I was watching while doing research was commenting on how, yes, that's true. That's probably more of a coincidence because there was also, well, or at least, has he actually said? I couldn't find any actual evidence.
I did find an actual quote of him saying, like, "Oh yeah, the Darth is from the word dark, and then Vader is father in German," is what he said.
Right.
Which it's not actually.
But it's
close.
enough,
It's
yeah.
close, but
Yeah.
it's well, I mean, it's also in Dutch. It's not pronounced Vader. It's
Right.
Father. Yeah.
Okay, well, so the video that I was watching, there were a couple points where I was kind of like, I feel like he's assuming. Apparently, though, there is also someone with the last name of Vader in George Lucas's high school yearbook that was a jock.
Yeah.
Now, so then the assumption that the person in the video was making was that George being a geek, which, again, I didn't know in the first hand.
The jocks are the bad guys.
The jock is the bad guy, maybe this guy in particular. So,
Hey,
with
there
the
you
last
go.
name Vader.
That would be funny.
So, apparently that's not as true, or maybe that's just what George...
But it's not as much of a slam if you think about it. It's like, you were a jerk to me, I'm going to immortalize you as one of the coolest bad guys in history.
Well, again, it wasn't the intention.
Yeah, I know.
But, so I guess it depends on if you like to believe in the tinfoil hat theories or not, if that's
Yeah.
true.
Well, and from what I've seen some analyses discussing it seems pretty clear to me that Lucas was filling that in later, that he was saying, "Oh yeah, this is
Yeah.
totally father."
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure that he did not know that when he named Darth
I
Vader.
I would be, again...
Especially
as a
since it's abundantly clear that he did not plan for Vader to be Luke's father from
Right.
the beginning.
Yeah, the historian in me is going, there is not nearly enough evidence for
Yeah.
this theory to be true.
So,
Yeah.
So-
I could buy him naming him after a high school nemesis or
Yes,
something.
that sounds
that's more plausible to me.
Yeah.
so
But
So,
yeah,
there it is.
possibly
Yeah.
apocryphal.
Decide for yourself, listener.
Yeah,
that's right. The other item that I found interesting was actually it showed up more in George's original drafts of Star Wars because he went through, like every writer does, a dozen different drafts. But the first draft started talking about the
that's
Kyber
good.
crystals, and it wasn't originally a crystal that powered the Jedi's lightsaber. It was actually more of a kind of a focus sort
Crystal
of something
that gave them the powers.
Yeah. And something to help them communicate with the Force and that sort of thing. But apparently that's more out of a book called Galactic Patrol by E.E. or Doc Smith.
There's a
Doc Smith.
ton of influence
Yeah.
from him in Star Wars.
Yeah, there is.
Like, the list was so long, I'm like, I saw Ross had some notes on this, I'm like, I'm going to let him take it. I'm not even going to include anything else from this guy, because there's like 20 things
Yeah.
from his
Well, and
books.
actually the only thing that I found mentioned were the Kyber crystals and basically the concept of the Death
Here,
Star.
I think I've got that list right here. Let me pull it up. So you keep talking about.
Well, and that was all I had because that was all that was I found in my research. So, but yeah, the in that book there was an installation that was supposed to be impenetrable, even especially from small attacks, which had one tiny weakness. Although in the book it was more of just a base, a big installation rather than a whole planet.
So here now, some of these definitely feel a little bit more of, well, yeah, that he could have lifted that, but that could just be a similarity. But we've got spherical moon-sized spaceships, smaller spherical jetless fighters with accumulators for beamed power, light swords with slicing blades of flame or planes of force, used for melee combat. The lensmen from his books have the telepathic powers of the Jedi derived from crystalline lenses similar to his early drafts of the Kyber crystals. Tractor beam may or may not have been invented by Doc Smith. The concept of a tractor beam and then lifted by Lucas. It might have come earlier than that, so it's less a case of, this happens a lot in sci-fi where it's less a case of, oh, I'm going to lift that neat idea, and more, this idea is so useful that it just enters, like,
Right.
nobody questions tractor beam if you put it into any sci-fi anywhere. We know what a tractor beam is.
Yeah.
A similar one that's less well known, but outside of like literary sci-fi circles, is Ansible, which was coined by
I don't even know what that is.
I feel bad because I should know who she was. I want to say Ursula Le Guin, but I'm not sure she was. I don't know. Apologies, listeners. I look forward to your comments correcting me. But yeah, it was a sci-fi term for a device that allowed for faster than light communication, and she named it the Ansible. And well, now I'm gonna have to look that up because I feel bad not giving her credit. But yeah, it's a faster than light communicator is an Ansible, and it was so useful having a name for a device that did that more and more writers have just wholesale lifted Ansible left and right. You can find it in Orson Scott Card's books. I've used it in my stories.
Yeah, I've heard the name. Yeah.
Well, and another example too is like laser guns. You know, that like this is a pistol or this is a rifle, but instead of a bullet, it shoots lasers. Like, it's just one of those things that it is so ubiquitous now that it just... You don't even have to credit anybody for this or say, well, this person inspired me to use laser guns. It just is.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I mean, and at some point, that was a novel enough idea that someone came up with it, and other people were going, oh, I'm going to ape that because it's real sci-fi and really cool. It is Ursula K. Le Guin. Sweet! So that was from
Chris
her...
is never wrong, listeners.
No, that's... I wish. That was from her novel, Rokinen's World. But, so... Ursula K. Le Guin is one of the grandmasters of science fiction for a reason.
All right, here we're getting into a little bit more meteor stuff here.
Meteors.
Yeah, meteors.
He also wholesale lifted meteors out of real life.
Darn that, George Lucas. What a ripoff, using meteors. No, just kidding. Casablanca, the movie, classic movie. 1942, Michael Curtis is the director.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Humphrey Bogart as Rick and Ingrid Bergman as Ilsa. They're just awesome. That was just my first part of the notes. They're just awesome. You need to know that. It's a great movie. It is long. It could be tighter, I think, than it would be if it were made today. But seriously, go watch it. If it's black and white movies scare you,
get over it.
Get over it and go watch it. It's fantastic. And my note here, I just wrote, if Humphrey Bogart isn't the inspiration for Han Solo, I will eat the microphone. Because...
Except Ross won't let him, so we'll find something else for him to eat.
I honestly, you watch Casablanca, and you're just going, Humphrey Bogart, oh my gosh, it's Han Solo in 1940s Germany.
Yeah.
Africa, but...
Yeah.
Monaco. But yeah, it's... It is so clearly Han Solo. He's got this cocky, self-assured swagger. He's quick with a gun when he needs to be. You know, he's a sweet talker, smooth talker. He's good with the... he is Han Solo.
Yeah. That's another of those that a lot of people point to as, this feels really strongly evident, and... Yeah.
Yeah, because I didn't really know any Casablanca at all, except that, it's this classic movie. And we bought it one year, my wife and I bought it one year for Christmas, and it sat on our shelf for 2 years. And I was like, we bought this years ago. We're going to watch it, dang it. And so we sat down and we watched it, and instantly I recognized the character of Han Solo in Humphrey Bogart's Rick. And I was just like, oh my gosh. And then he would say things, and I'm like, that's something Han Solo would say. My further notes here, at one point in the movie, fairly early on actually, so Humphrey Bogart's character Rick, he is helping people escape the Nazis. If you can somehow make it to Casablanca, Morocco, he will hook you up with fake papers, and he'll get you on a boat to England or to America or to wherever you want to go. He'll get you out. So he's clearly here doing illegal stuff, and Nazi officers come in occasionally and check up on things. And
it's worth noting too that he's doing it because it makes him money, and it's not a bad thing to do for him. But he's not doing it out of a sense of I'm a patriot who I'm going to save people, theoretically.
Yeah. Right. And so there's this one point where he literally has just handed off these illegal papers, because the Nazis are saying, no, you can't leave, nobody can leave, nobody's papers are good, unless it's signed by so-and-so. And so he has just, moments before, handed off some illegal documents to get these people out. And these Nazi officers show up, and he turns around and smile, hey guys, what can I do for you, Totally exactly like when the stormtroopers show up in the cantina right after Han Solo makes the deal to help other people escape the area illegally that they're not supposed to.
Han Solo's initial offering for how much he wants for it is also the same amount that Rick charges.
Yeah.
Is it really? Yeah, 15,000 francs instead of 15,000
credits. Yeah, it is so... But just his attitude of hey guys, I'm not doing anything wrong. Can I help you? Is exactly Han Solo when the stormtroopers come up, but Han Solo doesn't say anything. He just sits there I'm not doing anything. Totally Han Solo. Rick is literally in a cantina helping people who want to avoid the law find transportation away from the cantina. That is Han Solo's introduction. And then like Han, Rick is actually a good guy at heart, even though he has this veneer, this mask of being all about the money, and I'm only in it for the money, sister kind of an attitude. But you find out, of course, throughout the movie that he actually is a good guy.
He's a patriot.
Trying to, So, I mean, very, very much like Han Solo.
I would also point out with Casablanca, like Casablanca is
Sorry to spoil Casablanca, by the way, for anybody who hasn't seen it.
You know, the spoiler alert phase for that has lapsed. It's long gone. No, Casablanca is one of the defining Hollywood movies. Like, its influence, it's basically established the formula by which Hollywood movies are made. Mm-hmm. And if you, like, I highly recommend, if you want to hear more about that, one of the most fascinating episodes of the Writing Excuses podcast is one where they had Lou Anders as a guest star. I believe it's titled The Hollywood Formula. So go look at it. It's like 20 minutes long. Their podcast really short, really easy listen, but it's fascinating stuff picking apart how this formula works and how Casablanca established it.
Yeah.
And it's definitely a formula that you can see repeated in Star Wars.
Some movies are classics just because, like, the Oscars say they are.
Yeah.
Others are classics for very good reasons. Casablanca is one of those.
Well, and especially if you have any interest in critiquing or making film, you need to pick it up because there's just something. It's really hard to explain, but there's just something about seeing someone do something for the first time, even if it's something you've seen in film. Like, you've seen what Casablanca did.
Yes.
You've seen it dozens, hundreds of times. It shows up left and right in movies.
Yeah.
But seeing it done for the first time is just very it's very easy. You know, it's not as polished. It's not, the veneer's not there, and you can see the thought process behind it and how it works, and it's like almost all the gears are exposed, and so it's very helpful. There's a reason we go back to all these older original movies, even though other people have done it and sometimes done it more effectively. But it's because you can see the gears exposed like that, and it's very helpful.
As usual, Chris does a better job articulating my thoughts than I do.
90% of that I've lifted from other people.
But you're absolutely right, Chris, because sorry to gush about Casablanca some more, but again, the first time I was watching it with my wife, almost every scene I was doing that, I was like, oh my gosh, that's where this movie got that from.
Yep.
Oh my gosh, that's where, this shows up in this and this that I love. Wow, that's really well done here in Casablanca. And every scene blew my mind because of that exact thing where I'm just going, holy cow, I'm now seeing, I knew there were ripples, but now I'm seeing where the rock was actually thrown.
Yeah.
You know, and it is amazing to see that initial telling of those elements, and it's really incredible.
Well,
Seriously, go watch Casablanca.
One of the things that Lou Anders pointed out in that podcast is that if you go back and watch, like, Casablanca won Best Picture that year at the Oscars.
As well it should.
Yes. If you go back and watch the winner from the year before that, it's kind of a mess. Like, narratively, compositionally, it's all over the place, and you can see where Casablanca really set the standard by which other people started going, oh wow, that is effective storytelling right there. I'm going to use that.
And great music too, and everybody in it, like all the main cast, are phenomenal act. Like, Casablanca's so good, guys. Go watch it. Yes. Moving on, I'm going to give you two, Chris and Ross,
I've got
a
a note real quick on a smaller.
Go for it.
Let me pull this up. So there's a lot of sci-fi movies that influenced visually Star Wars, and in small ways here and there, or large ways. Forbidden Planet, 2001: A Space Odyssey, Silent Running, whole lots that influence these. Metropolis is one that's often specifically cited, because if you've seen anything from Metropolis, you've seen the gynoid, the robot double of Maria in that, who is, like, you'll see it and you'll go, C3, it's C3PO. Like, the design is
the girl
very,
version of C3PO.
It is.
And it's very close.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Even probably part of the explanation why C3PO is somewhat androgynous. Like, he's ostensibly he's played by Anthony Daniels, but his behavior is not heavily influenced. It's not cliché-ly masculine or feminine. It's just sort of, he's androgynous. And which is fine for a robot, makes sense. Fine for anyone if they want to be, but
Anthony Daniels said that when he was coming up with how to play the character of 3PO, that and he kind of asked George, like, what am I going to be doing? What is this character? What's his role? And kind of had that explained to him. He said, okay, I'm going to imagine the fussiest British butler I can imagine, and I'm going to go with that. So C-3PO is a fussy British butler. Which he is. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to leave this up to you two. I have two historical comparisons or influences and then we can go back into movies, or do we want to keep with movies and save the history for after?
I'd say let's go through the historical stuff. Change
Okay.
the pace for everyone.
Alrighty. That was my thinking, but I thought I'd give you guys a chance. So, Lucas has stated previously that he modeled the Empire after the most evil organization he could think of,
Yep.
Nazi Germany, the Third Reich. And the similarities are overwhelming and abundant.
Absolutely.
Hitler's brown-shirted, enforcers were literally called Sturmtruppen, stormtroopers. Okay, right there.
That's where he lifted the term.
Yeah,
that's-
fully just ripping that off. If you look at Star Wars Imperial uniforms, they match Third Reich uniforms.
The officer uniforms.
From
yeah.
The officer uniforms are
naval uniforms match the naval and Air Force uniforms of Nazi Germany. That kind of Feldgrau, greenish blue kind of a color that you see that, Admiral Piet or Admiral Ozzel wearing, right? Those kind of, or General Veers. Whereas this shows up more in Star Wars Rebels, for instance, and some of the more expanded stuff. But the Army kind of kept the khaki, brown, whatever, and you see that with the Army uniforms in Star Wars. The higher ranking ones getting special uniforms, black. The elite forces, the SS, right, gets black uniforms. Same thing, the elites in Star Wars get uniforms. You think about the Death Troopers in Rogue One, although that's not Lucas, but obviously still drawing inspiration there. But even the elite, everybody on the Death Star. You don't get to be on the Death Star unless you're somebody special, and all the Death Star operators, they're all dressed in that special black. Of course, Vader and the Emperor are in black as well. But what is more interesting to me, and I mentioned this earlier I think it was the original trilogy episode, our very first episode. I'm a historian.
I think it was the prequel one, actually.
Oh, the prequels. Okay, yeah. I'm a historian by profession, and I was teaching a history class, and we're talking about Hitler, and I was like, you know what? I love Star Wars so much. Here's my opportunity. Because I told them all semester how much I love Star Wars, and I was going to talk about it someday. So I did. So here we go. You tell me what I'm describing. A desperate people on the brink of war and experiencing financial crisis elect a scheming, manipulative, charming politician to the office of Chancellor. This Chancellor begins to play on and prey on people's fears about the future, promising that further faith in him will forestall future failings. Like my alliteration, I can't resist. Knowing the dictator clause of the Constitution, the Chancellor creates an emergency so that the people will give him that emergency power. Temporarily, of course. Once total power is gained, this Chancellor, now dictator, immediately uses his power to arrest or execute all of his political enemies. The Senate then grants the Chancellor unilateral authority to enact legislation outside the Senate. And when asked, hey, what do you think the Senate will think about all this?
I am the Senate.
So who am I talking about, guys? Who did I just describe?
Sounds like Palpatine.
Yeah.
Right, no, that was Hitler, right?
Yep.
Okay, so this, I couldn't find my original lecture notes that had all this in there, so that was the one I just created just this morning for it, and then I found my lecture notes. So here's what I actually had on my for real slide for my college class here. Cunning politician with a violent background becomes involved with a fringe political unit, begins building a secret army, uses political favors and underhanded deals to get himself named Chancellor. Once in power, he orchestrates an emergency which necessitates the granting of emergency powers to the Chancellor. Continues to extend himself more and more while manipulating the Senate and other elements of the government to do his bidding. Unleashes military might against his political opponents, ending them overnight. Unleashes fully modernized army on everyone around him to establish a mighty empire. Is also surprisingly racist. Okay, who did I just describe? You can't tell the difference, right?
Yeah.
They are so similar, and this was 100% intentional by Lucas when he created the prequel trilogy. Okay, why not, if you've already modeled the Empire as it's established after the Third Reich, why not model its rise after the Third Reich? So, in, 1936 or something like that, I can't remember the exact date, the Reichstag, which is essentially the Congress building. It's where the German Senate, the Weimar Republic, met. Mysteriously, quote unquote, catches fire. The Nazis conveniently, who are on site, the Nazis who are conveniently placed on site, while the fire happens, catch a drunk Dutchman nearby who happens to be a communist. The Nazis then execute him immediately, come back in with the dead body, and tell everyone that he totally told them that he started the fire. But now we have an emergency because darn these communists. Right? Yeah, exactly. So all these communists then, that's the what Hitler used. And then, of course, when they grant him dictatorial power, he says, okay, great. Round up all the communists and everyone who's ever looked at me sideways and arrest them.
Yeah.
And that's Palpatine. Hey, great, I've got this unilateral power now.
Yeah, Palpatine one-upped him.
Yeah,
he actually did get... Well, no, it's... Hitler very clearly had someone set that Reichstag fire, whereas Palpatine just leaked the information to the Jedi that he was actually a Sith, waited for them to come try and kill him, and then staged their attempt to kill him.
It's a little different,
or arrest him.
But
I'm just saying, Palpatine one-upped it. He actually got them to do what he blamed them for.
Yeah.
He just cast it in a different light.
Yep. So, again, if you just take out the names, it's almost impossible to figure out who are you talking about, Palpatine or Hitler, which is fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. And that's been done before too, though. I mean, this is Julius Caesar or trying to take power. Of course, he got offed, but it's just amazing how similar that is. The other historical thing, which again I didn't realize until started doing research for this, and then I was like, oh wow, dang, that's actually really close. Arthurian legend, okay, the legend of Arthur.
Before you delve into that real quick, I'm going to add to the Nazis.
Oh, do it.
That J.J. Abrams consciously, in his Force Awakens with the First Order, was consciously continuing that analogy, where after World War II, there were quite a few Nazi officers who escaped the war criminal trials and everything by fleeing to Argentina and going into hiding there. And part of his idea for the First Order was, what if that's what the Empire did, only they actually got their crap together and built back up into a terrifying military force once again. And you can see that if you Hux's speech to the troops in Force Awakens is very deliberately, you look up speeches that Hitler gave to the troops and such, is very deliberately echoing that arrangement and that placement, and even his style of speech.
Right.
It was very similar.
Well, and with the banners behind them and stuff, I mean, it is clearly like the Nuremberg speeches that Hitler gave and stuff.
Yeah.
And then they all give a salute afterwards.
Yeah, and I'm going to add one more very interesting little tidbit that I saw in a couple places. So, have either of you ever heard of the movie The Triumph of Will?
Okay. I heard about it only because I was doing research for this show, but I already had so much stuff I decided not to include it. So I'm glad you're doing this.
This part of why I mentioned earlier about how, you look at the first movie to really establish these patterns or try these things, and how that's very useful and influential, and that's part of the reason that there's two particular movies that are still used in film classes, despite being objectively horrible. And one of those is The Triumph of Will, which is a Nazi propaganda film, and the other is I'm suddenly blanking. Birth of a Nation, which is a Ku Klux Klan propaganda film, basically. So they're both legitimately awful in what they're talking about and the way they're portraying both racists as the heroes and black people in particular. In the case of Birth of a Nation, as just horrible. It's horrible. Yeah. It's horrible. And but
the subject matter is terrible.
Yeah.
But the
reason they still stick around is because there really is something useful about seeing that done for the first time. Yeah. As legitimately horrible as those are, a lot of people have made overtures to have those removed from film classes and everything, with plenty of good reason. But at the same time, the reason they're being kept is because you lose that effectiveness with later attempts to do it. Anyway, so The Triumph of Will was a Nazi propaganda film, war film, and it is pretty horrible in a lot of ways. But it closes with a scene of troops assembled while the heroes of the film are given awards and everything. Is uncannily similar to the ending of A New Hope, where Luke and Han receive awards and Chewie doesn't. But
because he's an inferior, he's non-human.
Yeah, and if you look this up, like I'm going to show these guys the picture here.
Oh, jeez.
Can't show
even
you
visually, that is.
It is a very strong scene, and Lucas has never said I deliberately modeled it after that. but it is very visually similar. It's hard to argue that, and as a filmmaker, he would have seen this,
Right.
especially in that era. And it's just a very interesting choice, considering the fact that he's deliberately modeling the Empire after the Nazis, but
And
that
yet
final
the good
scene in
guys
Star
get
Wars
this.
with the rebellion is
Man.
almost certainly modeled after this ending.
Well, and what's interesting too, in the
Triumph of
picture,
Will.
you have 3 banners of
Uh-huh.
the Nazi flags, and in the
temple.
the temple, there are 3 pillars of light.
Yeah, 3 windows there.
Yeah.
I couldn't remember if it's lights from the floor
I think
or if
it's
it's
windows, yeah.
but either way, three panels in either case.
The game makes it windows.
I think it's just lights. Anyway.
It could be anything.
But either way, that's what I'm saying. Like,
But yeah,
even the
visual
number of
similarities, yeah.
visuals and things like that. Yeah, 3 banners
Yeah,
versus 3
troops assembled in
elements of
careful
light.
order with the heroes marching down
Boy.
the middle of the aisle between them up the stairs to receive awards, like,
which is hilarious.
and
when
then
you watch it
turning
without
and getting
music.
cheered and saluted. Yeah.
Oh,
But
man.
yeah, it's just a little interesting tidbit of like, wow, that's an interesting
Yeah.
choice for the rebellion.
That is, yeah.
But it is a very dramatic scene,
Yeah.
so you can see part of why he chose that.
Oh man.
For the record, they are windows, but they look like
windows.
light.
Okay,
from
they're
the
like
beginning of that
backlit or
scene.
whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Just
okay.
when they're far away from it, the exposure makes it look like just light. But
Cool.
you get
Ross
close
is looking
and-
it
All
up on his
so,
phone.
Yep.
I think that's
Okay,
Nazi
so
Germany.
this was kind of interesting. Arthurian legend, right? Really from the 12th to about 14th century, maybe 15th century. I've written award-winning research on King Arthur's origins. I'm just throwing that out there.
Whoa.
King David of Scotland, King David the First of Scotland, I believe. That's what he was modeled on.
That's awesome.
Anyway, there's a compelling paper out there by me somewhere.
I never edited that one. What is this?
I know. Well, because it was anyway. That's
it's good,
another
it's
time. So Luke as King Arthur. Okay, they're both orphaned. Both had greatness in their future prophesied from birth/young age.
Yep.
Both were mentored by a powerful old wizard. Cue Han Solo calling, Uncle Owen calling Obi-Wan an old wizard.
Not only had the prophecy about them, but also had the lineage that they did not know about.
Now, hold
Yes.
on.
Oh, I was.
Where's the prophecy about Luke? The prophecy, the only one I remember talking about is the one about Anakin.
Yes, and they have since said that a prophecy which misread could have been, it's actually about Luke.
Anyway,
is what
it-
they've
okay.
come out
Yeah,
to
okay.
say.
Yeah, that's fair.
Um,
That's a bit of a
I
stretch,
just
but
wanted
it's
to
very
make
similar.
that distinction
Yeah,
for...
yeah. Yeah, but anyway, yeah, they've since come out and said, no, it was misread. Yoda was right. It's about Luke. Luke
Okay.
is the chosen one. But both had a powerful and kind of bad father, Vader and Uther Pendrag. Both of their fathers had been mentored by an wise old wizard who failed to train them correctly, and they were corrupted and became evil.
By the same wise old wizard.
By the same
Who
old
ends up
wizard
training them.
who then says, I screwed up. Previous generation, let me try again. Like, that's pretty awesome. And of course, the the Arthurian legend is one, like we talked about earlier, where there are some things that are so old that they just become universal, right? Arthurian legend is, by the time Lucas gets around to making, Star Wars is going on 500 years old, so
Yeah.
it's had time to percolate and get everywhere. But even so, I thought, like, that's a pretty specific analogy. And I don't know if Lucas necessarily was like, oh, I'm going to take this element out of King Arthur. But nonetheless, the correlation's there, which is interesting.
It's very strong. It's arguable at the very least.
Yes, exactly. Okay, moving on, going back into film this time. Where are my notes? They're all disorganized. Here we go. You can hear my thousands of notes here rustling.
Come on, that's like a,
Yeah, I know.
that's like a tenth of what I had for.
Yeah, I know.
Rogue One.
Chris, he brought in like this legal pad, like filled to the brim of notes.
It was all on my
Jedi.
phone, but I specifically
was-
did that so they wouldn't see just what they were getting into.
It was dictionary size by the time we were done. Let's go ahead and jump into Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers.
Yeah, Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers. You mind if I do a bit of history?
No,
there?
go,
Okay.
please.
So just very briefly, Buck Rogers in the 24th century was a story about an American veteran of the First World War.
TV series, if I'm not mistaken.
It actually started out
comic.
as a novella.
Novella, okay.
Yeah, it was. He wasn't even named Buck Rogers in the novella. His name was
interesting.
Anthony Rogers. And
then he got a cool nickname later on.
he got a job after World War I surveying abandoned mines and got trapped in one, and there was a radioactive gas down in the mine that rendered him catatonic and preserved him in perfect state for basically for about 500 years, and he woke up in the 24th century where in an Earth that was now ravaged by conflicting armies and such, and became this hero. But Buck Rogers, it started out as this novella, and then it got a comic series based off of that, and then it got, I think the radio plays came next, and then it was adapted for television and movies.
So it had a long and luxurious career.
Up and down, all sorts of stuff.
Man.
Got pulled back out and had more stuff made later, particularly after Star Wars success. Both got a new TV series and such.
Can I share a fun story from my childhood?
Sure.
So, speaking of its continued success, I can't remember if it was DuckTales. I think it was DuckTales. So, as a kid, growing up in the 80s and 90s, DuckTales was an awesome show, which has been recently revived by Disney with Critical
Tennant,
Role alum Sam Riegel at the helm, directing that.
Oh, really cool.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I
think
was
so.
say.
Anyway, but they had Duck Rogers on there.
Duck Rogers of the
29th century,
century
whatever it was.
yeah.
But clearly a parody of that. I didn't know that Buck Rogers was a thing as a kid. I only knew Duck Rogers.
Most of us only knew Duck Rogers.
Yeah, so when I got older and heard Buck Rogers, I thought, oh, that's funny that they're taking this Duck Rogers and making it more serious.
It was the comics that gave him the nickname Buck, by the way.
Yeah,
He's
so
changed his given
anyway.
name to William.
Every time I hear Buck Rogers, all I can picture is Duck Rogers.
Yeah.
Well, and I was thinking the Looney Tunes, Daffy Duck doing, I don't remember it, but it's in the 24th and a half century. That's him versus Marvin the Martian all the time.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. That's Duck
I mean,
Rogers.
pretty impressive, like, cultural diffusion with Buck Rogers.
Yeah, and like a lot of innovative things that were popular, especially in comics, it got a lot of knockoffs. So you've got Captain Marvel to Superman, you've got all these knockoffs in comics that appeared, and with Buck Rogers, one of those knockoffs, so to speak, or at least very heavily influenced similar stories. Buck eventually did go into space after a couple episodes, was when he started going to space. But you had Flash Gordon, who began in space as a comic series, got adapted into radio plays, TV shows, movies, etc., got revived after Star Wars, the success of Star Wars. And Flash Gordon is specifically what Lucas wanted to make.
Yep.
Like when he started this project, he wanted to do a Flash Gordon reboot, remake, and he could not get the rights, and so he went, well, I'll just do my own Flash Gordon then.
Yeah.
To quote Bender, it's like, I'll have my own Flash Gordon then, with blackjack and hookers. I forget the Flash Gordon. But sadly, we lost that version too. But yeah, he even said at one point, he was quoted as saying that the characters in Star Wars are not so much characters as they are loving tributes.
Yes. George Lucas has never made a secret of his love for Flash Gordon, nor the fact that Star Wars only happened because everyone told him, no, get lost. Nobody's going to watch your Flash Gordon movie.
Yep.
Be gone.
Which is funny because in 1979, Flash Gordon got revived as a television series.
Yeah, exactly. 2 years after Star
Yes,
Wars, and they
2
went, "Oh,
years
geez,
after
people
Star
like
Wars."
people like sci-fi. Let's do this." So here is a little excerpt I have. We're gonna play a game here. Ross and Chris, you got to guess what I'm describing. Okay. Two heroes disguised in the uniforms of soldiers of the megalomaniacal space emperor infiltrate his megafortress to rescue and defend an occasionally scantily clad brunette princess with the help of a large, hairy, animal-like ally. These heroes will also encounter a fearsome monster in an underground arena, visit a city in the sky ruled by someone who works for the baddies but will turn out to be one of the goodies, use laser guns and have dogfights in space. Oh, and did I mention this movie opens with an opening crawl of text? What am I describing? Star Wars or Flash Gordon?
Yes. Yes.
Why not? ¿Por qué no los dos? Right? Why not both? Right? Okay. That is the my own words summary of Flash Gordon Conquers the Universe.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you lifted that straight from Wikipedia, actually.
Most of it. I did reword some of it. I did, yeah. Yeah, no, Chris is right. I did.
No, I read that
yeah.
same one.
But yeah, I tried to rework some of it so it wasn't direct plagiarism. But
to quote Saturday morning breakfast cereal, it's a Wikipephany. That moment when you realize that the seemingly intellectual conversation you're having is based off of both of you having read the same Wikipedia article.
Yes, exactly. But I was reading that Wikipedia article and I'm just going, holy cow, yeah. That's your original trilogy right there. It's ridiculous.
Even straight down to the princess not ending up with Buck Rogers, she ends up with his companion.
Oh, I did read that part. Wow.
Yep.
See, there we go.
Because he had another love interest, which they dropped.
See, yes, Chris has pulled back the curtain, revealed that we just look at Wikipedia, but we do it so you don't have to.
That's right. I looked at other things.
Yeah.
I also looked at some of Wikipedia's sources.
Yeah, as did I. Let's see. So there's Flash Gordon, Buck Rogers. Hidden Akira Kurosawa. Let's just make that its category.
Not just
there.
Hidden Fortress.
Yeah.
Many of Kurosawa's films.
So, oh man, a little tidbit here. The Japanese word for a period film is Jidaigeki, which there's no proof. Lucas has never said this, but it's speculated that initial sound there, Jidai, is Jedi.
Where he got the Jedi.
So there you go. Hidden Fortress, 1958, Akira Kurosawa. I watched it just this morning in preparation for the podcast. It was really good. It starts off in an interesting way. It starts off by introducing a tall, lanky peasant.
Starts out in a battle. You meet these two peasants.
Where you meet one tall, lanky peasant and one short and stockier peasant. That is 3PO and R2. These two peasants, who are introduced first before all the other characters, are the comic relief, which I thought was an interesting choice, that in a relatively serious movie, you introduce the comic relief first and give them actual, quite a bit of screen time before you get to anybody else, really. Which was I'm like, boy, this is it's almost jarring, but then I'm going, no, but actually, now that I think about it, that is exactly the opening of Star Wars.
And Kyler, who is the anybody else that they eventually get to?
Yeah, the princess, right? Yeah. So, and this is interesting, too. The peasants, they have a bit of an argument at the beginning.
Right, that's right.
And he specifically, the tall peasant, the 3PO peasant, specifically says to the short R2 peasant, don't come crying. They basically argue about going separate ways. I think we should go this way. I think we should go this way.
And they split ways.
They do split ways. And they basically, it ends exactly like in Star Wars, where he's saying whatever. And the line in Hidden Fortress is, don't come crying to me, which is almost exactly what 3PO says. In fact, when he said that, I thought, that's 3PO's line. And then I went back and watched it, and 3PO doesn't actually say that.
Yeah,
but it's
very similar.
It's very, very similar. Particularly just in the attitude of, okay, fine, well, screw you, you don't know what you're talking about. The peasants' music, their theme music, which appears anytime it's sort of focused on them, is very, very, very similar to the droids' music. The little flute trills and kind of the wood block, whatever, it made me think of Tatooine, honestly. Listening to the music for the peasants made me think of the droids walking on Tatooine. It's that similar. They both go their separate ways and are separately captured by the Jawas in Star Wars, but by the same Imperial Army or whatever in Hidden Fortress. Then later on in the movie, they meet up with this wise old warrior, very much an Obi-Wan, but in Hidden Fortress, he's kind of a dual Obi-Wan and Luke role.
Yeah.
But they have this, they get spotted by these Imperials, or by the rival clan. Oh, by the way, the princess in Hidden Fortress is the last princess of her clan. Her whole clan has been wiped out, and she is the lone survivor of her clan. Well, her and this wise warrior, this general.
Yep.
And so she's trying to get to allies to raise a rebellion against the clan that wiped her out. But they get spotted by 4 soldiers of this clan that's hunting down this princess. And the wise warrior quickly dispatches 2 of them while the other 2 get on the horses and start running away to go tell the rest of the army, oh, we found the princess, she's on this road, come help get her. And so he says, you guys get the princess away. The warrior does. He says, you guys get the princess away, I'll go after them. and he takes off after them. And my first thought while watching them fight, because he eventually it's way cool too. His horse is galloping, and he's just sitting there holding his katana upright, and he's not moving at all. His horse is moving, but he's just like, it was a really cool image of like this solid, determined warrior. You know, it was really cool visuals. But when he finally catches up to these two riders, and he starts trying to get him or whatever, and they both have spears, so they're trying to fend him off. My first thought was, oh my gosh, this is the motorcycle scene from Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, where he's getting chased by the Nazis.
Yep.
It's very much a a callback to that, I thought. So I thought that was interesting.
It's also very similar to Luke and Leia riding speeder bikes.
Yes, and that's the next thing I was going to say, is that, it's essentially the speeder bike chase from Return of the Jedi, which also goes back to Ben-Hur, because the speeder bikes get locked.
Yep.
Right.
And they have to, ditch it or whatever. But really, really interesting. I thought there's your speeder bike chase. Mm-hmm. And it was just as good in Hidden Fortress as it is in Return of the Jedi.
Really solid
it's
scene.
a really cool scene. Even though I noticed some tricks, obviously because it's old, that I'm like, they're reusing that footage, but they're speeding it up slightly each time they show it, so you get the sense that he's gaining on them, the warrior's gaining on these two guys. Then he takes them down, but he takes the last guy out right before they get to the main camp, and then he gets surrounded. And then you have what is the next thing on here. The group is spotted. The warrior master sacrifices himself so the group can escape, which is exactly what Obi-Wan does on the Death Star. Mm-hmm. While the enemy soldiers stand by and watch the warrior take on their leader.
Yep.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh,
a scarred general that he has a history with.
Yeah. So he gets there, and they're all closing in on him, and he's getting ready to fight them all. And the general comes in. He's like, "No, leave him to me. He's mine," kind of a thing. And they have this epic duel. It's a really cool fight. Really, really cool fight. Unlike Obi-Wan, though, this guy lives
because he's Obi-Wan / Luke. So
he's Obi-Wan
/
Luke. Exactly.
Right.
Obi-Wan died because we didn't need him anymore.
Yeah, he defeats the general, and then he goes back to help finish escorting the princess. Also, the princess. She's an extremely strong character for a 1958 movie.
Yeah, 1958 Japanese movie.
Japanese movie. She is bossing people around. She's taking charge. She's not taking crap from anybody. She is cunning. She knows when to play into the, I'm a woman, I couldn't possibly be a threat. And then the next second she's like, boom, I pulled out a knife, very much like Princess Leia, where when it's useful to pretend to be all docile and whatever, she does.
That's true. She does it the very first.
Yeah.
Well, even then though, she never stops being pretty feisty.
But that's the thing. Even with this princess, that's still her fierceness is only momentarily contained ever, and when it is, it's only barely. Yeah. But I was struck by that throughout the whole movie. She is an extremely strong, pretty independent. She's she pulls out a stick at one point in the movie and threatens to beat this warrior general down. Well, because he's not doing what she wants. Mm-hmm. She takes the stick and holds this stick. It's just like a tree branch. She just holds it at him like it's a sword. And she's threatening to I'm going to whoop you right here if you don't get in line. And I'm like, dang, 1958 Japan. That's pretty dang impressive. And of course, instantly you're thinking of Leia, who doesn't take crap from anybody. She yanks Han's gun out of his hand and blows the hole in the garbage thing, tells everybody to get down there,
while insulting them.
While insulting them. Yeah, while insulting them, no less. So that's pretty cool.
Well, and I mean, for me, the demonstration of her fierceness is, while in captivity, she is regularly mocking her captors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it's
even the very first thing she says to Luke is, "Aren't you a little short for a stormtrooper?"
Well, the princess does this in Hidden Fortress as well. There's a point where the general that the warrior master defeats ends up turning turncoat. He joins them, and then they get captured right at the very end of the movie before escaping one more time. But you have the princess, her warrior general guy, and then the other general that the warrior defeated who's joined them. They're all captured. They're tied up on stakes in the ground. They're tied up and they're going to execute them later or whatever. And the warrior general is trying to get her to shut up so that she doesn't make it worse. And she tells him no. She's like, heck no, we're going to die anyway. I'm going to say whatever I want. And just starts telling the captors off right there, and then they eventually get rescued. But it's Yeah, very, very much.
You get
Princess
rescued
Leia.
when the airplanes fly in and blow the place
Exactly,
up.
yeah. Which is really a feat for Kurosawa's samurai to construct
I know.
planes. Yeah.
Airplanes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Little steampunk going on there.
Continuing on with Kurosawa, 1961.
I would add real quick,
go.
before we leave Hidden Fortress, they also have a section wherein the princess switches places with the slave girl, and slave girl masquerades as the princess, which is pointed to as a potential inspiration for Amidala and her handmaiden.
Yeah,
and-
although switching places with your body
Yeah,
doubles
that's
is
nothing-
a tried and true
yeah,
tactic throughout
nothing
history.
new,
So,
but
but still,
given his
there it
predilection
is.
for
for Kurosawa
using
films,
Kurosawa
yeah.
stuff, it's quite possible.
And a
that's-
couple other things that I found on this point in particular. One thing I wasn't sure on that was true was that Lucas was also looking at the rights for this movie. Instead of just taking it as inspired by, he was actually looking at doing
an
taking
American
A Hidden
Ice.
Fortress.
Yeah, Hidden
Oh,
Fortress.
cool.
but then decided that what he wanted to do was different enough and did change things. His initial scripts, like version 1 of Star Wars, did have all these divisions. Like it was the wise old general instead of Luke. It was the father was the farm boy, and all sorts of other things like that.
Interesting. So the film Yojimbo in 1961 and the 1975 film Dersu Uzala. Just a couple of minor notes here. Yojimbo, the heroes hide under the floor to avoid detection.
That was Sanjuro, actually. It's the sequel to Yojimbo.
Oh, you're right. Yeah, sorry. Yes, that's
Yojimbo
correct.
had the brawl scene in the cantina.
Yeah, that's what it
influence.
was. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Thank you, Chris.
No, you're good.
Yeah, so hiding under the floor, just like they do in the Millennium Falcon. That's there. And then the Dersu Uzala is more just a visual inspiration that the hero looks out across the desert to see the sun setting and the moon rising in the same position in the
wow.
sky.
Yeah.
So you get the binary sunset on Tatooine
Right.
from that, which I would like to go back and actually watch that scene just for the Casablanca effect of seeing it done the first time, because again, like we talked about in the original trilogy episode, you watch that binary sunset with the music, I mean, you're moved. You feel exactly Luke's desperation of I'm never going to get out of here. You feel everything that you're supposed to.
Yep.
And I would love to go back and see the original version of that.
Yeah.
Just
I would
sounds
also add I forgot with both Flash Gordon, Buck Rogers, and Hidden Fortress, camera work was also influenced by this a lot, particularly the cuts. Where, when you cut
yeah, that
from
was
one
the other thing,
scene
yeah.
to another,
Yeah.
there's a lot of ways to do that. You can just jump from one to the other. Sometimes they'll fade in if they're trying to do something particular. And Star Wars, you can, if you're thinking of it, you see a lot of these horizontal screen wipes where the shot rolls over to another one. And that was heavily influenced. Kurosawa, that was kind of out of favor at the time in Hollywood. It still is, for
It
that
still
matter.
is,
yeah.
but I love it though. It feels
It,
like Star
and
Wars
that's
to me.
why he did it, is because it evoked these old Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers serials, and was also something that Hidden Fortress did a lot. And so he took that from those in order to evoke those serials and make it feel. He also, that we mentioned in an earlier one, where he wanted to film with a soft lens to evoke the soft lens used in Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon.
Which
Gordon
would
in
have been
particular.
terrible.
Which would have been terrible. It was
Thankfully,
particularly
someone
with
said
his,
no.
with his used universe that he was doing. So we're
Yeah.
glad that.
Yeah, can you imagine a soap opera version of Star Wars? Oh, it would have been terrible. Oh man.
But yeah, so that was another one that's heavily influenced by those.
Ross, did you have anything?
That was
to add?
all.
Okay. So the last thing.
There's also a scene in Derzu Uzala where they're caught in a blizzard and the captain has to drag his friend him out into a shelter and stuff him in
dragging
where
him through the
he's
snow. Yeah, so very much like Hoth, and
yeah.
so which that whole opening with the Wampa and everything only happened because Hamill got into a car accident before they started shooting, and his face got all messed up.
Yeah.
So they had to explain the scarring somehow.
Yeah.
Which is, I'm sad, Luke. I'm sorry, Mark Hamill, that you got in an accident. I'm sorry about that. But
Pretty sure he's over it at this point.
but
Well-
it was a really cool scene, so I'm glad we got it.
The last I'd heard, actually, it was kind of traumatic because I believe the other two
really?
people died.
Yeah, it was
God,
pretty
but-
bad.
So, I mean,
I
it
apologize
was-
for
So-
my flippancy then.
Yeah,
It's like, obviously, I wouldn't wish a horrific car accident on anyone, but we got a pretty dang cool Star Wars scene out of it, so there we go. Anyway, yeah, I know. Now Mark will never come on the show.
We're just burning through all our
yeah.
potential.
I know,
guest
nobody's going to
celebrity.
want to come. Anyway, so I'm way excited for this one, just because to point out the examples from mythology that this goes into. So leaving Hollywood and going into the written word, there is a book written first in 1949 that got its second edition in 1968.
Yep.
9 years before Star Wars comes out, called The Hero with 1,000 Faces by Joseph Campbell. Chris, did you want to talk about it?
Absolutely can if you want.
Yeah,
I can go on.
Why don't you talk a little bit about it? And because you're...
So,
Well-
Hero of 1,000 Faces
Yeah.
is one of the central influences. Like when George Lucas, when you're talking about the influences on this, it's basically Flash Gordon and Hidden Fortress and Hero of 1,000 Faces. These are the big triumvirate of influences on Star Wars. And this was a work by Joseph Campbell where it's a scholarly work wherein he is studying aspects of various myths and legends from around the world, looking for commonalities, looking for kind of a base monomyth is what he called it, the story behind all of these stories. And more, generally largely succeeded at that. He outlined what is generally known as the hero's journey. And while it is something that had been around for a long time, Joseph Campbell is generally rightfully credited with being the person who took all of this and collated it and went, look at this.
Pointed it out.
Yeah, this is something we're doing. And the hero's journey is something you'll see all over. It's a very frequently widely used writing tool, largely because of what George Lucas did with it, where he actively took Campbell's research and went, I am going to do this. I want to create a monomyth. I want to create a modern mythos. And so I'm going to follow this hero's journey. He follows it both within the original episode, the original movie, and within the original trilogy, follows it on a larger scale.
Yeah. So also we have like Inception levels of influence here.
Yeah.
Because Stanley Kubrick, who did 2001: A Space Odyssey,
among many others,
what he said, yes, I like this Hero with 1,000 Faces, let's do this. It's an influence for that, which then 2001: A Space Odyssey turns around and influences Lucas for Star Wars. So you've got like layer upon layer of influence. But the definition here, this is actually the summary of what a monomyth is. Mono from the Greek meaning one, so one myth, right? Which speaks to this, that this is a constant throughout all humans and all their stories, no matter where or when you're looking. So this is actually from the book. A hero ventures forth from the world of common day into a region of supernatural wonder. Fabulous forces are there encountered, and a decisive victory is won. The hero comes back from this mysterious adventure with the power to bestow boons or gifts on his fellow man.
Yep.
Like that's kind
that
of
is the
summary.
heart of the monomyth. Yeah.
So then, Chris mentioned the steps of the hero, or the hero's journey, right? Is kind of also what this is called. The whole process of going from the common to the supernatural and back with what you have learned is the hero's journey. So the steps of the hero's journey are this, and see if you can pick out anything from Star Wars in here. The hero's journey begins in the ordinary world. He must depart from the ordinary world when he of course just referring to the hero here, right? When he receives a call to adventure. With the help of a mentor, the hero will cross a guarded threshold leading him to a supernatural world, where familiar laws and order do not apply. There the hero will embark on a road of trials where he is tested along the way. The archetypal hero is sometimes assisted by allies. As the hero faces the ordeal, he encounters the greatest challenge of his journey. Upon rising to the challenge, the hero will receive a reward or boon. Campbell's theory of the monomyth continues with the inclusion of a metaphorical death and resurrection. The hero must then decide to return with this boon to the ordinary world. The hero then faces more trials on the road back. Upon the hero's return, the boon or gift may be used to improve the hero's ordinary world in what Campbell calls the application of the boon.
Yep.
Okay. So I think we could just take that paragraph and go through A New
Well,
Hope.
and I could even go into slightly more detail of what's usually used for the hero's journey. So you start out with the hero in a normal situation. Luke on the farm.
Yep.
They receive a call to action of some sort where they are told, hey, here's the quest, here's what you need to do. Generally speaking, not always, but generally speaking, they'll usually refuse that call. Mm-hmm. At least
which Luke does.
At least once, which
well,
Luke
what
does.
is the
when
call
Obi-Wan,
then in A New Hope?
In A New Hope, Obi-Wan tells him, you must go with me. And
become a
Jedi like your father. Yes.
Okay, and then Luke says, I can't I've got to go back to the farm, and Obi-Wan tells him that's your uncle speaking.
Yep. And so Luke turns down the call, he goes back to the farm, finds his family destroyed, and then comes back and accepts the call.
So is that the crossing the guarded threshold?
That is the threshold there.
And
when
of
he
course
comes and
Obi-Wan
accepts
is the mentor.
Yeah, Obi-Wan is the mentor. So he crosses the threshold, he accepts that. and steps out into a wider world.
The
Is often how that's,
supernatural world.
the supernatural world. But when you're working with it, places that aren't strictly supernatural, you'll often just have something greater than, beyond the norm in which
Yes.
they lived. So in a this is a fantastic film with the Force and such. That's when he begins learning to use the Force. He steps into this fantastic world. But it's also a very familiar, just beyond what he knows. He leaves Tatooine.
Yeah, where the familiar laws
on
and order do
Tatooine,
not apply.
he leaves the farm and
Yeah.
he goes into this bar where he's immediately assaulted by a guy. It's obviously beyond
These are
the
the
rules and order
trials
that he knows.
going to...
Yeah.
He goes through these trials, and then at some point the quest will take them. It's usually described as the underworld. He
Yeah,
goes
the archetypal hero, sometimes assisted by allies. We
Allies,
meet Han
we
and
get some
Chewie
allies here.
immediately.
We get Han and Chewie. We go to save the princess, so you descend into an underworld of some sort, into this area of danger beyond even the dangers or unfamiliarity of that supernatural area. And in this case, the underworld being the Death Star. We get captured. We're trapped behind enemy lines in this.
That's no star, Chris.
Yes.
It's a space station.
Yes.
Shoot, I had to
no
make
moon.
Ah, darn.
That's no moon.
No, I know, but he said star.
Death Star. It's its name. Come on.
Shoot, I'm sorry, guys.
Good try.
Sorry.
Good try. But yeah, they get trapped in the Death Star. It is even visually, it's a step away from everything. It's the shiny, but it's grays and blacks with these shiny black floors.
It's intimidating. It's
everybody's
bigger than
covered
anything he's
in
ever seen.
these armies. Yeah, you've got these gaping chasms that are very much hearkening to kind of an underworld-esque feel. So you go through this trial in the underworld, and the hero undergoes some sort of major significant loss in order to, and often as part of escaping from the underworld, or as it's the low point in the story, is how it's often depicted.
So this is interesting then. So that if we're looking at the whole original trilogy, then so Dagobah and losing
in the
people
original
on Cloud
movie,
City, then,
he loses Obi-Wan,
right?
And that's his underworld where he comes out of. In the trilogy as a whole, he goes kind of starting with Dagobah, really going into the cave on Dagobah,
Yeah,
right.
and then going to
Yeah,
Cloud
that's what
City.
I meant by Dagobah is the cave.
And with Cloud City, it's very much echoed by we start out in this bright, shining part of Cloud
And
City, and then
everything
we
gets
go
darker.
down into the depths.
Yeah.
Into these dark,
Interesting.
again, yawning chasms. These
Yeah.
are all the lighting is shifted to these reds and blues that are much darker. It's the underworld. And in there, he loses his innocence. That's often a part of the hero goes from being innocent to being scarred in some way, but learning, this loss of innocence, which is what Luke goes through there. He not only loses a hand, but he also finds out that he's been lied to, that the people he trusted have deceived him. And,
He's having a bad day.
and that he's he's the progeny of the bad guy, and that maybe he should be on that side. That's usually the second act of the story if you're breaking it up into a 3-act structure, and which is why it's the second movie. And then they come out of that. They are reborn, so to speak, by coming out of the underworld, and then they have a final climactic battle where it usually, as we see it in Monomus, where they use the boons they have brought, whatever they earned in the underworld and brought out with them to save the day, is how the bestowing of boons usually shows up.
Yeah.
Is they save everyone by using whatever they've gained in the underworld, which in Luke's case uses the Force to blow up the Death Star and save everyone.
Yeah. So some real life examples of this archetype, this cycle, this hero's journey showing up. Prometheus. You guys know Prometheus?
Oh, yeah.
Chris, you want to...
No, you go
Quick,
ahead.
okay. So Prometheus, right? He is mankind. Mankind does not have fire. Only the gods have fire. Prometheus is the guy with enough guts to go and steal fire from the gods, which he then applies the boon by giving fire to mankind, and he's then finishes out with the inclusion of death at the end of his hero's journey and resurrection, because he's chained to a Mount Parnassus, I think it is, and a buzzard comes and eats his liver and insides out every day, and then they regrow overnight, and then the buzzard
and then eventually he is saved and set free by
I can't remember who.
Perseus, I want to say.
Odysseus from the Odyssey fame here.
Yep.
Okay, everything is going well at Troy. They sack the city. Everything's happy. He goes on to go home, and then there's all sorts of, supernatural shenanigans that happen. You got the Cyclops, Poseidon's pissed at him.
Yep.
You have the Lotus Eaters. You've got
he loses large numbers of his crew.
large
Well,
numbers
all
of
of his
his
crew
crew.
eventually.
But along the way, he's learning and gaining skills, and more importantly, learning hubris.
Yeah.
And then he gets back and saves his family, who's about to fall into ruin. And then this was an interesting one that I hadn't thought of, but it totally applies. Moses! Okay, your Old Testament Moses, right? Things are going well in the palace of Egypt. He crosses the threshold by getting kicked out of Egypt and sort of
and by it's his choice.
Yeah, it's his choice. He leaves.
It's his choice that gets him kicked out. Rather.
Yeah,
he doesn't.
But yeah, either way, threshold crossed. He goes out. He endures trials throughout the desert. He is mentored by a flaming bush, which is another further trial. He takes what he learns out of that down back into Egypt, rescues the people. But also that's kind of like episode 4. You've got the longer Moses trilogy, where then they have to descend into the underworld, as Chris talked about, of the desert for 40 years. Then, there's quite a lot of similarities there.
Jesus Christ is often referred to as part of this as well. It's with a very literal descent into death and resurrection.
Yeah.
Is one of the archetypal stories that he pulled from for this.
So that's the Hero with 1,000 Faces, and I have wanted this book for a long time.
It is a dry read. Man.
I'm sure,
brace yourself.
I would love it.
It's very useful.
I'm
it's
a
very
historian,
important.
Chris. All I read is dry
That's
stuff.
fair. That is fair. But I will warn you, listeners, if you want to pick up Hero of 1,000 Faces, it is useful and amazing. It's also really, really dry.
So that is, unless you guys have anything
I have
else.
a few other little ones here and there that I can mention. And these aren't any of the really strong ones, but Isaac Asimov personally pointed out quite a few similarities between George Lucas's Empire and the galaxy that Asimov depicted in his Foundation series. Mm-hmm. There are some significant differences, but Asimov himself was kind of like, yeah, I can see some of my stuff here. And it was a similar thing with Dune. Frank Herbert's Dune. You've got this desert planet setting with a moisture-based economy. I'm reading this straight from Wikipedia, so. Spice smugglers, beast interstellar antagonists, and mystical mind control using sect with great influence over galactic politics. Particularly in the earlier drafts of this, where Leia was not holding Death Star planes, but she actually had a smuggled shipment of spice that was which was very similar to Dune.
From Kessel, where the spice mines are?
I have no idea, but apparently Frank Herbert himself had a list of things, of similarities between Dune and Star Wars that
so there you go.
He pointed out. And that's another one of those too, where Dune was very popular as within science fiction literature circles, but it got a movie mainly because of the success of Star Wars. Which it was actually a huge problem for it because so many of the things that were in the book, they couldn't. And this may be apocryphal, but I heard it from Kevin J. Anderson, who co-writes the current Dune books with Brian Herbert, Frank Herbert's son. So I feel pretty reassured that this is fact.
That's fairly
is that when they made the Dune movie, the reason it's so different from the books in a lot of ways, and the story was kind of stunted and impacted, is because there were so many things that they just couldn't use without people accusing them of stealing from Star Wars. And so they had to change those things around and ended up with a story that was significantly different.
I think we call that George Lucas ninja'd me.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. And so, they are actually currently working on a new film adaptation of Dune, and we'll probably get closer to the originals now that it's been long enough that we can probably go, yeah, look, this is original.
There you go.
Well,
right, as original as things get, but
I'm sure people will still complain because Star Wars is still enough social consciousness.
But there are also people who, you look in the comments of any of the Star Wars comparison videos on YouTube that I watched earlier, where you got a bunch of people being like, Lucas is a hack that just stole from everyone else. It's like, welcome to artistic creation.
That's how art works, guys. Sorry.
Yep.
Oh, man. Well, I think that was a pretty fun episode, a pretty fun discussion. So we hope you guys enjoyed it. Please let us know in the comments what you thought, if we missed anything, or if we made mistakes. If we made mistakes, let us know where we made mistakes.
I actually said, this just occurred to me, so I'm going to divert your ending real quick. Sorry.
Do it.
This is part of, I discussed earlier, why part of Lucas's problem with Force Awakens when it came out. He talked about how it was just being Star Wars. It was looking backward instead of forward. And this is part of it. Obviously, Lucas has lifted a lot of things, but this is where he was taking from other places to build something new. And that was kind of the criticism of the new series, whereas it's looking backwards and trying to be what we've already done again. It's that nostalgia versus building something new, and all those references and drawing from various places to And it's part of what makes Star Wars great is we're drawing from so many sources that it all blends together in this amazing phantasmagoria. But that's kind of what George was looking for, which is so in a lot of ways this is a very good thing to do.
You could say Phasmagoria because it's Star Wars.
But yeah, if you're writing something, this is one of the ways to do it: is take a bunch of familiar things and smash them together into something that is new and novel in some way.
And part of also why I hate those complaints is because so much of this comes from knowing the formula, right? I mean, even the fact that the Hero with a Thousand Faces exists shows us there is a formula to how a really compelling story does.
I was also
and that the elements of that story have been largely unchanged for thousands of years.
I was also going to add Lawrence of Arabia and The Searchers are two more films that very heavily influenced George's visual style, particularly in the Tatooine scenes. The Searchers also may have influenced the story in numerous ways, especially with the family getting killed and then going out. Anyway, those are another two to refer to.
So
very archetypal, wonderful stuff.
Alrighty, our next episode is going to be awesome. I'm super excited for this. We are going to be doing something a little bit new, something we haven't done before.
Which, given that we've done, 10 and a half episodes, that's not hard.
That's right. Hey, we set the bar low here.
We're adequate.
Kyler, will be quizzing these two scruffy nerf herders, Chris and Ross, on their original trilogy knowledge. We're going to do this Jeopardy style / make it up as I go along style.
And basically make it up as we go along, in the sense that if he starts asking us questions and we just get a lot of dead silence where Ross and I are going, then he'll probably adjust down.
And that as well, but also, I haven't watched Jeopardy in I don't know how long, so I will be making the rules up to this game mostly as I go.
I was going to say, most of my experience with Jeopardy over the last few years is entirely SNL skits. So come along for the ride. We'll see how it goes, it's going to be awesome. We will also have our first guest, kind of. Oh, right. Yeah.
Well, we'll explain that one.
So, we'll see you next time. As always, I'm Kyler. You can follow us. Please follow us on Twitter at More Civilized, and do join in the Facebook group and More Civilized Podcast so that Steven doesn't have to comment all by himself. Thanks, Steven. It's good playing with you, by the way. I play Star Wars Legion and Star Wars Armada with Steven Boswell. He's a great guy. So, thanks for listening, Steven.
We also would like you to follow us on the actual podcast website, which for us is a morecivilizedpodcast.podbean.com. You can find me at Mr_R* on Twitter.
Yep. You can find me on Twitter at Itinerant Baxter. If you listened to earlier episodes, ignore what I said my handle was. I don't get on Twitter often. It is a dark place, a wretched hive of scum and villainy. And I would also add that if you would like to see our podcast on any sites or any apps that you cannot currently find it, please let us know about them, because we want to make sure it's available in as many places as possible.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let us know where you want to see it. If you really, really, really want to see YouTube videos with just the audio of this, maybe we can make that happen if there's enough call for it, but please let us know.
Yeah. Until next time, may the Force be with you.
Always.
I'm Anna Graves, and thank you for listening to a More Civilized podcast.